40 floors above the city, John Sterling sat in his glass tower like a king surveying his kingdom. The city below twinkled with a million lights, each one representing lives he neither knew nor cared about. From this height, people looked like insects, insignificant, disposable, easily crushed under the weight of his empire. John had turned cruelty into currency. His hotels didn't just exclude the poor, they crushed them. Every policy, every procedure, every interaction were designed to separate the worthy from the worthless. He had made himself untouchable, unreachable, and utterly alone. All of that was about to change, because of four faces he couldn't unsee. Before we dive in, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Hit the subscribe button, and turn on notification for more emotional stories like this. The man who now owns 6 luxury hotels across the country, had once been a boy who knew what it felt like to go to bed hungry. John Sterling's childhood was written in unpaid bills, and shut-off notices, in cramped apartments, where the heat worked only when the landlord felt generous. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep them afloat, cleaning offices at dawn, serving lunch at diner, stocking shelves until midnight. She would come home exhausted, her hands cracked and bleeding, counting coins on the kitchen table to see if they could afford groceries that week. John was 8 years old when his father walked out, leaving nothing behind but a note on the kitchen counter and a pile of debts that would haunt them for years. The man who was supposed to protect them had chosen to abandon them when life got too hard. That abandonment carved something cold and permanent into John's heart. He learned that depending on others was dangerous, that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, that the only person you could rely on was yourself, and even then, only if you were strong enough to take what you needed. The journey from that broken boy to millionaire in the penthouse had been built on a foundation of calculated cruelty. Every business decision, every policy, every interaction was designed to ensure he would never be vulnerable again. His hotels didn't just cater to the wealthy, they actively destroyed anyone who couldn't afford to belong. The Sterling Grand had a dress code so strict that they turned away families who couldn't afford designer clothes. The rates were set high enough to bankrupt middle-class dreams. 6 months ago, John had fired a housekeeper who was 7 months pregnant. Her crime, taking too many bathroom breaks. When she begged him to reconsider, explaining she had no other income, he had security escort her out, while she sobbed. 3 weeks later, an elderly man named George had come to plead for more time to pay his extended stay bill. His social security check had been delayed, and he just needed a few more days. John had personally overseen his eviction, watching as the man's belongings were placed on the sidewalk in the rain. The staff knew better than to bring him sob stories. He had trained them to see compassion as weakness, to treat human suffering as someone else's problem. His hotels ran like machines, because he had systematically removed every trace of humanity from their operations. John had convinced himself that this coldness was strength, that his ability to make decisions without emotion was what separated him from the weak. He wore his reputation like armor, using fear as his primary tool for maintaining control. But there was something else hiding beneath all that ice. A part of him that remembered what it felt like to be powerless. A part that knew exactly how it felt to be thrown away by someone who was supposed to care. He had spent 27 years building walls around that vulnerable child, creating an empire designed to ensure he would never feel that helpless again. Every cruel decision was armor. Every heartless policy was protection. The question that haunted those who knew his story was simple, profound. Can someone this cold ever change? Or is the damage permanent? Tonight, 4 little girls sitting in his lobby were about to provide the answer. While John built his empire of ice, 4 sisters had been fighting a battle they never should have faced. Their names were Grace, Hope, Faith, and Little Joy. Names their parents had chosen with such love, never knowing how much strength these girls would need to carry them. 18 months ago, their world had shattered in an instant. A drunk driver running a red light had stolen their parents on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday night. Mom and Dad had been coming home from their anniversary dinner, probably laughing about something silly, when everything ended. The girls had been staying with their great-grandmother that night, a sleepover that had suddenly become permanent. Grandma Rose had opened her small apartment and her enormous heart to 4 grieving children, stretching her fixed income to cover 4 more mouths, 4 more dreams, 4 more futures, suddenly depended on her. For over a year, Grandma Rose had been their anchor. She helped with homework at the kitchen table, braided hair before school, and whispered bedtime stories that made them believe everything would be okay. Her social security check barely covered their needs, but love had filled the gaps that money couldn't reach. One Tuesday, Grandma Rose collapsed while making breakfast, her heart finally overwhelmed by the stress of raising 4 children at 73. Paramedics had worked frantically, but the damage was severe. She lay unconscious in intensive care while the girls waited in a hospital hallway, holding hands and trying to be brave. Social services had scrambled to find emergency placement. Sisters together was nearly impossible. Most foster families couldn't handle that many children at once. The caseworker, overwhelmed and underfunded, had made a desperate decision to use the department's emergency housing fund to place them temporarily at the Sterler end. It was supposed to be just for a few days while they found a more permanent solution. The caseworker had explained that they needed to stay quiet, stay together, and stay out of trouble. The girls had nodded solemnly, understanding their behavior could determine whether they remained together or were split apart forever. For 2 weeks, they had lived like ghosts in the luxury hotel. They whispered instead of talking, tiptoed instead of walking, and made themselves as invisible as possible. Their meals came from vending machines in the hallway, crackers and juice boxes purchased with the few dollars the caseworker had left them. Grace, the oldest at 12, had become the mother they'd lost. She rationed their snacks, helped her sisters with homework, and lay awake at night, listening to their quiet sobs, while pretending she wasn't crying too. She knew the weight of keeping her family together rested on her small shoulders. Hope and faith, the middle sisters, had died in the way children do when the world becomes too scary to understand. They spent their days drawing pictures of the family they'd lost, and the home they hoped to find again. Their artwork covered the hotel room walls, colorful reminders of dreams that seemed further away each day. Little Joy, only 6 years old, still asked when Mommy and Daddy were coming back, when Grandma Rose would wake up, when they could go home. Her sisters took turns explaining gently that some questions didn't have the answer they wanted to hear. None of them knew that the department credit card had reached its limit 3 days ago. The system had failed them again. Paperwork lost in bureaucratic shuffle. Payments declined without notification. 4 children forgotten in the gap between policies and compassion. When John received that call at 9:47 p.m., he hadn't hesitated. Hotel policy was clear. Payment declined meant immediate removal. No exceptions. No questions. No mercy. He had given order without knowing their story, without caring about their circumstances, without considering that these weren't adults who had made poor choices. These were children who had been failed by every system meant to protect them. Now they sat in his marble lobby, small figures surrounded by everything they owned in the world, waiting to be cast out into a night that offered no promises and no protection. Drop a heart in the comments if you're rooting for these girls right now. John closed his laptop with the same mechanic precision he applied to everything else. The quarterly reports were complete. The numbers were perfect, and another day of profitable ruthlessness was officially over. His routine was sacred. Private elevator to the parking garage, luxury car to his penthouse, solitude until morning. But tonight, something made him pause. Maybe it was the faint echo of children's voices drifting up from the lobby 40 floors below. Maybe it was the way the city lights seemed dimmer than usual. Or maybe it was simply the universe deciding that some routines were meant to be broken. Instead of pressing the button for his private elevator, John found his finger hovering over the executive elevator call button. A deviation so small it seemed meaningless. Choice so insignificant it shouldn't have mattered. Yet something deep in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years, urged him toward that different path. The executive elevator arrived with its usual soft chime. John stepped inside. His reflection multiplied in the polished steel walls. 27 years of building this empire, and he had never once questioned his methods. Never once doubted that cruelty was simply the cost of success. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying him past floors filled with guests who could afford to stay, staff who feared to disappoint, and a machine that operated exactly as he had designed it. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. Everything was exactly as it should be. Fish Bustain. Floor 10. Floor 5. Each number that lit up brought him closer to a moment that would redefine everything he thought he knew about power, about control, about the price of building walls so high that nothing could reach you. Doors opened on the ground floor with a whisper of expensive engineering. John stepped forward, expecting to see his usual view of the parking garage entrance. Instead, he found himself looking directly into the main lobby of his crown jewel hotel. The Sterling Grand's lobby was a cathedral of marble and gold, designed to make ordinary people feel small and wealthy guests feel godlike. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that only unlimited money could buy. But tonight, perfection had been shattered by the presence of 4 small figures huddled together on an ornate bench near the entrance. The oldest girl sat with her back straight and her chin raised, but her arms wrapped protectively around 3 smaller sisters who pressed close to her sides. Her face was streaked with tears. She was trying desperately to hide, her eyes darting between the security guards and the imposing lobby around them. Grace was trying to be brave for sisters, but John could see the terror in her 12-year-old eyes, the weight of responsibility that no child should carry, the desperate calculation of someone trying to figure out how to protect the people they love when they have no power to do so. And Faith clung to their older sister, their faces buried against her shoulders. Their small bodies shook with silent sobs, understanding enough to know they were in trouble, but not enough to understand why the world kept taking away everything they loved. Lily's shirt curled in Grace's lap, her thumb in her mouth, a habit she had abandoned years ago but had returned to when her world became too scary to face without comfort. Her wide eyes stared at the marble floor as if trying to make sense of why pretty places could be cold. Around them, their entire world was packed into mismatched suitcases and garbage bags. Clothes that had been donated by neighbors, toys that had survived 2 moves and countless tears, photo albums that held the only proof their parents ever existed. 2 security guards flanked the bench like sentries, their faces professionally blank, but their posture making it clear that these children were being processed rather than protected. They wore the same uniforms John had approved, followed the protocols he had written, and displayed the same cold efficiency he had trained into every employee. The night manager stood nearby with his clipboard, checking boxes and filling out forms with the mechanical precision of someone completing a routine task. Jim, this was just another eviction. Another successful enforcement of hotel policy. Another demonstration of the Sterling Grand's commitment to maintaining standards. John stood frozen in the elevator doorway, his finger still hovering over the park garage button. Everything in his training, everything in his experience, everything in his carefully constructed worldview told him to press that button and disappear into the night. These children were not his problem. Their situation was not a responsibility. His job was to run profitable hotels, not to solve the world's problems. He had built his empire by making exactly these kinds of decisions, clean, efficient, emotionally detached. But something was happening in his chest, a tightness he hadn't felt since he was 8 years old, watching his father walk away, a pressure behind his eyes that reminded him of tears he had sworn never to shed again. A trembling in his hands that had nothing to do with temperature. The oldest girl looked up at that moment, her eyes meeting his across the expanse of marble and gold. For just an instant, John saw himself in her face, the same desperate determination, the same fierce protectiveness, the same terror, knowledge that the adults who were supposed to help had decided to walk away instead. The elevator doors began to close, programmed to return to their neutral position after 30 seconds. John could let them close. He could press the garage button and draw away. He could pretend he had never seen 4 small faces that reflected his own childhood back at him. His finger trembled over the controls. The doors continued their slow, inexorable movement. In seconds, this moment would pass. Everything would return to normal. But the machine would continue operating. The profits would keep flowing. The ice around his heart would remain perfectly intact. For the first time in 20 years, John Sterling didn't know what to do. The elevator doors had closed to within inches when John's hand shot out, his palm slamming against the steel with a force that echoed through the marble lobby. The doors shuddered, reversed direction, and opened wide again. For a moment that felt like an eternity, John stood there breathing hard, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged animal, finally breaking free. 27 years of careful control had just cracked wide open because of 4 faces that reminded him who he used to be. He stepped out of the elevator, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to announce that something fundamental had changed. The night manager looked up from his clipboard, surprise flickering across his face as the owner of the hotel approached the scene he had ordered. "Sir." The manager's voice carried a note of confusion. John Sterling never involved himself in routine evictions. He had built his reputation on delegating such unpleasant tasks to others, while maintaining clear hands and clear conscience. John looked down at the 4 girls. He saw children instead of problems. He saw fear instead of inconvenience. He saw a family trying to stay together instead of guests violating policy. "Cancel the eviction," Joe himself say, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. The words came from some part of himself he had buried so deep he thought it was dead. The security guards exchanged glances. The night manager blinked hard, certain he has heard. Cancel the eviction. This was John Sterling, the man who had personally overseen the removal of a pregnant woman, who had watched an elderly man's belongings get soaked in the rain without flinching. "Sir, I don't understand." The payment was declined. "Hotel policy clearly states." "I know what the policy states." John cut him off, his voice gaining strength. "I wrote the policy, and I'm overriding it. Take them back to their suite. Have housekeeping bring fresh towel, and room service send up dinner. Real dinner, not vending machine food." The lobby fell silent except for the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant hum of expensive air conditioning. Staff members who had worked for John for years stared in shock. This was not the man they knew. This was not the boss who had trained them to see compassion as weakness. Grace, the oldest girl, looked up at John with eyes that held equal parts hope and suspicion. She had learned not to trust at whom made promises. But something in this man's face was different from the cold expressions she had grown used to seeing. "Furthermore," John continued, his voice growing steadier with each word, "contact social services first thing in the morning. I want a full report on their situation and a plan for permanent placement. If the system can't find them a home, we'll find one ourselves." The transformation happening inside John was seismic. Walls that had taken decades to build were crumbling in real time. The ice around his heart wasn't just melting. It was being burned away by something he had forgotten existed. The memory of what it felt like to need help and have nowhere to turn. Over the following weeks, John Sterling became a different man. He quietly covered all expenses for the girls' extended stay, working behind the scenes to ensure they had everything they needed while social services navigated the complex process of finding them a proper home. He connected with the Rodriguez family, a couple who had been trying to adopt siblings for years, but had been passed over because most agencies preferred to place children individually. When John personally vouched for the family and offered to cover all legal fees, the system suddenly moved with unprecedented speed. But the changes did not stop with 4 girls. Something had awakened in John that couldn't be put back to sleep. He began walking through his hotels differently, seeing them through the eyes of someone who remembered what it felt like to be excluded, judged, and fed wanting. The first policy change came 3 months later. Every Sterling hotel would maintain 2 suites specifically for families in crisis. Social services, police departments, and hospitals could place families temporarily while more permanent solutions found. No questions asked. No payment required. His staff struggled to understand the transformation. The same man who had fired employees for showing mercy was now requiring them to attend sensitivity training. The hotels that had designed to exclude were being retrofitted to include.
John began meeting monthly with local social services directors, quietly funding programs that helped keep families together. He established emergency funds for utilities, rent assistance, and medical bills. His lawyers were baffled by the sudden shift toward philanthropy, but they followed his instructions without question. The pregnant housekeeper he had fired received an unexpected call. 8 months after her termination, John personally offered her a management position at twice her original salary, with full medical benefits and on-site childcare. When she asked why, he simply said he had made a mistake that he wanted to correct. George, the elderly man who had been evicted in the rain, found himself with a permanent room at the Sterling Grand, and a job as the hotel's unofficial greeter. His gentle way with guests and encyclopedic knowledge of the city made him invaluable. But John knew the real value was in giving dignity back to someone he had stripped from. The business magazines noticed the changes, but they couldn't quite figure out how to write about them. Sterling's soft touch didn't have the same ring as his previous headlines. But the hotels remained profitable. More profitable than ever, actually. As word spread about their new reputation for treating people with dignity, John kept in touch with grace, hope, faith, and joy through their new family. He attended school plays and birthday parties, not as the intimidating hotel owner, but as the man who had given them a second chance at happiness. They called him Uncle John, and he found that title more valuable than any business award he had ever received. The 8-year-old boy who had been abandoned by his father was finally at peace. The man who had built an empire on ice had learned that the strongest foundations were built on warmth, connection, and the radical act of seeing other people as human beings worthy of care. Would you have shown mercy? Comment yes or no. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that even the hardest hearts can change. 5 years later, the business world had forgotten about the Ice King of hospitality. John Sterling's name still appeared in financial reports, but headlines had shifted. His hotels were known for their warmth now, not their coldness. Guests wrote reviews about feeling welcomed rather than judged. But John preferred it this way. His philanthropy remained anonymous. His charity work hid behind shell companies and legal structures that kept his name out of the newspapers. He had learned that the most powerful changes happened in silence. One person at a time. One family at a time. The magazines that had once celebrated his ruthlessness struggled to understand the transformation. Profits were higher than ever. Employee satisfaction had skyrocketed. And the Sterling brand had become synonymous with compassion in the hospitality industry. Yet the man behind it all remained quietly focused on the work rather than the recognition. Then came a knock on his office door that changed everything one more time. His assistant announced that a young woman was asking to see him, someone who insisted it was personal, not business. Grace walked into his office, 17-year-old, confident, and radiating the kind of strength that comes from surviving impossible odds. She had graduated high school early, earned a full scholarship to college, and was planning to study social work. Her sisters were thriving with their adopted family, but she had never forgotten the man who made it all possible. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying the same protective love it had held in that marble lobby years ago. "Not just for helping us, but for showing me people can change. That one decision can redirect an entire life." John found himself speechless, something that rarely happened anymore. This young woman standing before him represented everything he had almost thrown away in pursuit of profit, protection. She was proof that mercy wasn't weakness. It was the strongest force in the universe. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the prisons we need to escape. And all it takes is one moment of courage to breathe. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Our next story will make you question everything you think you know about villains.